Hello, listeners. Mallory Wilsey here, Chief Producer of the Enrollify Network. So, everyone is talking about AI these days, but not enough people are taking the time to unpack how AI will impact the future of higher education. And that's why we launched the Generation AI podcast, co-hosted by Artis Cadu, CEO of Element 451, and JC Bonilla, Chief Data Officer at VaynerMedia. Artis and JC have worked on large language models for nearly 2 decades and have remarkable technical knowledge around how they work and how generative AI will impact the future of higher ed. Generation AI isn't just about understanding artificial intelligence. It's about being part of the AI revolution in education. Tune in, get informed, and be inspired to innovate in your educational space with the power of artificial intelligence. You can subscribe to the show by visiting podcast.enrollify.org or just search Generation AI wherever you get your podcasts.
So a correlation is just a relationship. Like when one changes, does the other change? What's the long-term arc of this variable, and does it match the arc of the other variable? And as we all would suspect, the annual United States household spending on fresh fruit is directly correlated at a high degree with the stock price for the Canadian National Railway Company. We could read a little into it and say, you know what, people are sending fruit via the railway. Maybe
I've always said that. Actually, I've for years have argued that these things are closely related.
To bring it a little bit more into higher ed, bachelor's degrees awarded in social services across the country is directly correlated with the number of phlebotomists in Florida. I don't even see an argument you could make there to show why those would be correlated. The popularity of the name Christopher in the United States is very correlated in a negative way. Like the fewer people that are named Christopher, the fewer burglaries there are in Oklahoma, which I think is important to note when you're naming your kids or deciding when to move in or out of Oklahoma. And when you look at, like I said, we're looking at correlation coefficients, right? So we're seeing very high degrees of correlations between these two variables, but they're obviously not causing each other.
Welcome to the EduData Podcast, a podcast that serves as your weekly guide to the data driving higher education. We are your hosts. I'm Jamie Boggs.
And I'm Timothy Davis. Join us every Friday for weekly breakdowns of the most important data, trends, and topics in higher education.
The EduData Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below.
Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.
Hello and welcome to the EduData Podcast. I am Jamie here with Timothy. What's happening?
Hey, back for another episode. Here we go.
Yeah, we are. Last week we talked about a study that was done that talked specifically about higher income serving institutions versus lower income serving institutions and the return on investment. I think return on investment's it's a big key word right now in higher ed for a reason. Everybody wants to get what they're paying for, and as an institution, you want to advertise that students that come your way can benefit from the service. But it raised a lot of questions to me about correlation versus causation. So we've kind of put together a conversation here to dive a little deeper into that. Did I even let you talk? How are you, Timothy?
Yeah, I've been silenced effectively. I wonder if I'll get any breathing room in this episode. I'm doing great.
I feel very horrible. It's excellent.
Yeah, because I've never been known to take up 5+ minutes of just monologuing on our podcast. So you're well do it.
There we go. I'll take it this time, but I'm not going to do that for the entire episode. Basically, when we study anything, we're trying to figure out why. We want to see cause and effect. We want to see, wow, it really seems like when we do that, this other thing happens, how can we do that more or less, right? Like we're trying to find something actionable to say this thing causes that thing. Is that too general, Timothy, in why we study stuff?
No, we want to understand how our world works, and so we use math and statistics to compare variables and try to understand how things are related. And we look for sort of levers that we can pull to improve life in our society, right? So we want everyone's income to increase. We want wealth to increase in our society, for everyone to have equal opportunities and equal opportunities to improve their lives and enjoy the luxuries that we've realized in the modern world. How do we do that? How do we understand how the world works so that we can craft better systems that elevate people? And that's what we're trying to do in statistics, for sure.
Yeah, and experimental design, I mean, you think about the scientific method and you're going to have a control group. There's going to be a variable that we're testing here. In the study we talked about last week, the variable was the populations of students being served by their income, and then the output was ROI, but that ROI was measured by income compared to how much you spent while you were in school. So I think we can automatically and often do add causation to degree leads to job leads to certain income. But there's so many other factors that it's almost, I'm going to use a word almost impossible to get to actual causation and research. It's much harder than anybody really gives it credit for, I would think. And maybe I'm just old and grumpy and being too hard on research. I don't know. Your thoughts?
No, it absolutely is. And in fact, I'd say it's probably impossible for the type of answers and the type of knowledge that we're seeking. And this is going back to some like statistical concepts. So first, let's introduce a couple of statistical conceptual ideas. One is the idea of observational studies as opposed to experiments, right? When we're talking about data in higher education, we're usually, I should not say usually, I should say we're always talking about observational research. So when we pull data from the Department of Education or from surveys or from software providers like Element 451, that's all observational data of behaviors or demographic trends, whatever, of the data that has been recorded by whatever sampling institution is collecting this data. Right. And then when we as researchers put that together and try to glean knowledge and insight from it, in that scenario, we are conducting observational research. That is opposed to experimental research or experimental studies. So that's observational research studies. Then we have experiments. And experiments actually apply some sort of treatment to a subset of the sample population. So you have a control group that does not get the treatment, whatever that may be. And this is perhaps more common in like medicine than in higher ed. It's difficult to find an example in higher ed because we don't do experiments in higher ed research and data. But in a medical experiment, for example, we would apply a treatment to a subset of our sample of rats, and then we would have a control group that does not get the treatment. All things being equal, we can then determine if the treatment relates to the outcome, the desired outcome, or not, right? So that's the difference between observations and experiments. Experiments can prove cause,
right?
So we can say that that input A that caused outcome B, right? Because we keep everything else controlled and we just apply the experiment to the test group. The control group stays the same, right? And then we can say that the drug we gave cured this disease or improved the outcome of this disease or whatever. But we don't do experiments in higher ed data, right? It's also difficult, if not impossible, to do experiments on like human populations, right? For either ethical reasons or for research reasons. So we don't do experiments. We just do observations. Observations cannot prove cause. Observations can only prove correlation. And this is where sort of the art of research and analysis comes in, right? Where we do all of the math, we do all the science in these studies to get to some outcomes, but then we have to interpret those outcomes. We have to make our best guess and our best understanding of what these outcomes are telling us, right? Correlation is also really interesting because, and this is what we're going to talk about here, some things can be correlated without being causal of each other at all. So you have some examples of this, right, Jamie?
I do. There's a TikTok channel that I follow that actually gave me kind of the idea to go this direction with this conversation, but just random correlations. And these are measured statistically. So a correlation is just a relationship. Like when one changes, does the other change? What's the long-term arc of this variable, and does it match the arc of the other variable? And as we all would suspect, the annual United States household spending on fresh fruit is directly correlated at a high degree with the stock price for the Canadian National Railway Company.
Hey there, it's Mallory, Chief Strategist of Enrollify. Higher ed is facing a leadership crisis. The demands on today's college and university leaders are skyrocketing, and talent is leaving the industry at an unprecedented rate. New leaders like you are emerging, but no one is getting the proper training to be successful. Well, Enrollify is here to change that. Our new course, Lessons in Leadership, taught by Dr. Carrie Phillips, will prepare you to be a confident, empathetic, and effective leader. From systems thinking to adaptive leadership, building culture to handling difficult decisions, this comprehensive online course is perfect for new and aspiring leaders. Don't wait. The course starts September 9th, and for a lucky group of 26 students, we have the option to add interactive sessions with Dr. Phillips for personalized guidance. Visit Enrollify.org to learn more.
We could read a little into it and say, you know what, people are sending fruit via the railway. Maybe
I've always said that, actually. I've for years have argued that these things are closely related.
To bring it a little bit more into higher ed, bachelor's degrees awarded in social services across the country is directly correlated with the number of phlebotomists in Florida. I don't even see an argument you could make there to show why those would be correlated. The popularity of the name Christopher in the United States is very correlated in a negative way. Like the fewer people that are named Christopher, the fewer burglaries there are in Oklahoma, which I think is important to note when you're naming your kids or deciding when to move in or out of Oklahoma. And when you look at, like I said, we're looking at correlation coefficients, right? So we're seeing very high degrees of correlations between these two variables, but they're obviously not causing each other. They're not even, the statistical relationship is there, but the actual relationship is non-existent. Now, there is another example that in just looking over some preparatory materials for this, ice cream sales being correlated with shark attacks. Okay? Like that is fact. However, there is an explanation there in that we eat more ice cream in the summer, we go to the beach more in the summer. So those two things, it makes sense they would be correlated, but they're not at all causing one or another. Summer may be causing ice cream to go up. Temperatures may be causing ice cream sales to go up and more people to get in the ocean, but the sharks and the ice cream are completely unrelated. And a lot of times you're going to see studies that try to make sharks and ice cream cause each other. And that's not going to work. You're going to read a lot of studies, and I encourage everybody to be critical when they're looking at these things to say, you know what, is that really a factor here? What other factors could be present in this study? My favorite part of every study to read is the limitations. Because I want to see, wow, what am I not thinking about when I'm reading this study? And the limitations will usually bring those out. Also, what are they leaving out of the limitations that I may have come up with? What is something that I read here that I have a question about that they don't even mention? Because those will often tell you why we can't determine causation, but also why the correlation may not matter as much as you think it would. So you can find millions of these things. The sales of vinyl records is correlated with Costco's stock price. and I don't think they specialize in those products. Bachelor's degrees in education across the country is correlated with decline in proofreaders in Kansas. Timothy, I know you grew up in Kansas, so you may want to worry about that. There are correlations between a lot of memes in their popularity. This is one of my favorites. The number of judges in Indiana has, since 2008, seen kind of an arc. It went up to about 2015, then decreased, almost perfectly in line with viewership of The Big Bang Theory.
So these are all just like funny examples of like how two things can be related, and it's you'll notice a lot of these are over time, right? And so when two things share the same time scale, right, it can often be easy to correlate them, right? Things increase or decrease over time, and you just put those things together, right? If you notice an increase, notice a decrease in any two things, slap them together, and you'll probably find a linear relationship. And a linear relationship, right, is the kind that we use the correlation calculation to determine, right? But basically we're saying, like, when we plot these data points on an X and a Y axis, they together form some kind of line, right? If that's a really straight line, we say that they're highly correlated, that their correlation is really close in our calculation of correlation is really close to 1 or -1 if they have a positive or upward tilting relationship or a negative downward tilting relationship on the graph. Or it's close to 0 where they have no linear relationship present, right? So those are kind of the statistical concepts. I wanted to circle back to one of the things you said about other variables. The scientific term for that, or the statistical term for that, is like a lurking variable, one that was not measured, or an alternative explanation is another way that might be referred to. And so it's really difficult when doing observational studies to account for all of those, right? Your survey instrument might not have accounted for them, or the data sets that you're blending might not account for them, right? But basically what that means is that these variables A and B show some sort of relationship, and it can be tempting to say that A causes B or that B causes A, right? But if we just take a one-off study and show, with a sample size of 500, that we proved a correlational relationship between these two variables, right? That can certainly drive a headline on BuzzFeed. What we need to examine is, are there any lurking variables that might show here? And I've got an example of a potential lurking variable here is beer sales and teacher salaries. We show that they have a positive linear relationship. But we have to look a little further into that research and say, well, how did they collect this data? They collected it by city. So is there a lurking variable in there that could explain their relationship? And when we talk about by city, well, yeah, there is, and it's the population of that city, right? The population of the city is going to have a higher teacher salary because of higher cost of living, a higher demand in the job market. It's also going to have more beer sales, right? Because, there's just more of a market for beer. There's more people to buy it. So it's always important to consider those lurking variables. And that is kind of the art of observational analysis, observational data-based research, is understanding all the potential factors that could be at play here.
Yeah, and there's so many, like we talked about last week, there are a lot of, you can't include every factor in every study. So you're just going to have to understand that and take that to account when you're trying to interpret it. But if you're trying to explain results to individuals, I just caution everybody to be very careful using the word cause, using the word effect, and when you're talking about correlation, just understand that relationship could have a number of meanings. I mean, there's a reason that we study so much. Like, we learn a lot from these studies, but everything's not what it seems. So this is an episode about caution when you're looking at studies, but I don't want to say they're not good, because they're, like, we learn so much from every study.
Exactly.
Just make sure you're reading it with through the right lens of being critical while being appreciative and learning.
And that's kind of bringing us to the last point of, like, when you're stuck with observational data and when you're in a scenario where proving cause is is operationally impossible, right? And you're only able to show correlations, how then can you be certain about anything, or how then can you make good decisions? Well, the burden then becomes you need more data, right? You need to show relationships across multiple studies, and you need to show relationships with lots of other variables involved. You need to look at relationships across lots of variables to see if any one particular thing is driving it. And then you also just need lots of what we might call like domain knowledge or domain expertise, right? If you're a higher ed researcher, you got to understand and see higher ed as an industry from a big picture, and you've got to have experience, and you've got to understand how the industry functions. If you don't understand those things, and then you want to design a survey, or you want to design some sort of research instrument that is going to measure the industry, categorize the industry, you better know a lot about the industry in order to design a good data collection instrument, right? So, but basically we come to know things in observational data by just seeing those relationships over and over and over, and then making our best sort of expert guesses at it.
Absolutely. So we're all guessers, but we can make very educated guesses through our research. All right, guys, we really appreciate you. For Timothy Davis, I'm Jamie Boggs. This has been the EduData Podcast.
The EduData Podcast is part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like the other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month. We've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional.
Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Jamie Hunt, Artis Cadu, Dustin Ramsdale, Jeremy Tiers, and so many of your other favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.